Okay. Today we're going to take a look at, we're going to review selection tools. We're going to review layers real briefly, and we're going to take a look at adjustment layers that we introduced last week. Okay. So first thing, we're going to go back over selection. And the major selection tools I've shown you so far are the marquee select, which is right here, which allows us to select an elliptical area or a circular area. If you hold down shift, it'll select a perfect circle for you. Command D to drop that selection. Or the rectangular select tool. Okay. And if I click this button here, everybody should know by now I go into quick mask mode. What is this showing me? What is quick mask mode showing me? Somebody. What's selected and what's not selected. So anything that's normally colored is selected. Anything that's got the red overlay on it is not selected. So that's a good way of seeing what's selected and what's not selected. Also, if you remember, you can use your erase tool and your paint tool to add to or subtract from your selection while you're in quick mask mode. So I just subtracted from the selection there by painting red in. Or I can add to the selection by erasing the red away. So now these tomatoes up here, make my brush a little bigger, these are now part of the selection. Okay? I'll go ahead and drop my selection. We also went over the lasso select tool, which is freehand. Okay? Let's set the feather value to 0. What happens to my selection when I have 0 feathers? Somebody please tell me. What is this kind of selection here? It is circular, I understand, but the edges. Talk about the edges. I have very sharp edges because I have no feather set on this selection. Okay, on the other side of that, let me drop that. If I have my feathers set to, say, 50 pixels, or 60, that'll work, and I made my selection, then the edge of my selection is very soft edged. Okay, and it's going to be harder to see anything that I do to this selection because it's blending in. Also, why can I only paint in this area? Why can I only paint in this area? Why can I not paint up here? Somebody tell me, why can I not paint up here? Because I only have this part right here selected. So when I select an area, I'm telling Photoshop that's the only selection, or only part of the photo rather, that I want to work on. So I'll go ahead and drop that. That is true for any selection. Okay? Right now I can't paint here, but I can paint here. Because once you've selected something, that's the only area you can work on. We'll undo that, we'll drop that selection. Okay? We went over the magnetic lasso tool very briefly. The magnetic lasso tool looks for the edges of things and sticks the selection down to them. So this tomato is a good candidate for that. It works well. There's my selection. Okay. We went over the magic wand select tool, which will select areas of similar color. If I hold down shift, I can add to that selection. Okay. There that is. So I will drop that selection. And we've gone over the quick select tool, which works a lot like the magic wand tool. There it goes. It selected all that green by just passing the brush over it. Okay? Now, if I want to get this selection up onto its own layer, how do I do that? How do I do that? Somebody tell me. What's the keyboard command to get this selection up onto its own layer? Command J, thank you. So just think I'm jumping that selection up onto its own layer. There it is. Selection's on its own layer. Okay, we also very briefly went over duplicating layers. Dragging a layer down to the new layer icon right here will cause that layer to duplicate. So there I have now 4 tomatoes where I had 3. I can select those layers, make them active, and then move those out. Okay? And we also went over one of the coolest tools of all, free transform. Somebody tell me, do you remember the command or the keyboard shortcut for free transform? Command T. That brings this little bounding box up, which lets me resize. If I let the mouse float over the corner, I get this little circular arrow with 2 arrowheads. I can rotate. I can move. If I hold shift down when I resize, it resizes proportionally. If I don't, I can squash or stretch my tomato. Okay, so you might want to know how to do either of those. And then I double click and I finalize that. Okay? And then towards the end of Friday, I introduced you to adjustment layers. So I'm going to leave one of those extra tomatoes up. There it is. I'll try to move him back. So adjustment layers. Okay, adjustment layers, special kind of layer right down here. Okay, and when I select it, I'm going to put a black and white adjustment layer between the background layer and this tomato layer. I can even rename this tomato. Okay. Now, quick question, why is this tomato still green and the background black and white? Somebody tell me. Go, Nico, tell me. It's above the adjustment layer. It's above the adjustment layer. So the adjustment layer affects everything from that point down in the layer palette. Also, when you add an adjustment layer, you get this adjustment palette that affects how that adjustment layer works. Whether it's a brightness contrast adjustment layer, or whether it's a black and white adjustment layer, or it's a levels or exposure adjustment layer, you always get a palette. Now that palette might be hidden. To get it back, you just click 2 times on the little adjustment layer icon. And now I can determine how my greens affect my black and white conversion. How my yellows affect my black and white conversion. Are the yellows darker or are they lighter? Okay, there are hardly any blues or magenta in this, so you won't see any change there at all. Those sliders don't have any effect because these colors are not present in the background layer or the image. But there's certainly a lot of greens in this, as you can see. So this is going to make my greens darker or lighter as to how they convert to black and white. Okay? So the adjustment layer only affects that point down. You can also convert this image to black and white by going Image, Mode, Grayscale, and it'll do it. It'll just flat out do it. Okay? But the thing is, you don't get any control over that at all. It just changes it for you. No control whatsoever. And there's really no undoing it. Once you save this image, that's it. It's black and white. Okay? I'm going to go back one in my history palette. So let's go back to here. The adjustment layer is what we call non-destructive. In other words, I save this as a Photoshop document. I decide for a year from now I don't want this to be black and white. If I throw that adjustment layer away, it's not black and white anymore. Go away. There it is. Okay? So it's not permanent. It's not permanently changing that image to black and white. Okay? Has everybody had a chance to play around with adjustment layers? Okay. What I would like you to do is go ahead and take your texture photo out and use the adjustment layer to convert your texture photo. And play with those settings to bring out the largest range between black and white that you can. Ideally, in a really good black and white picture, you want to see deep, rich blacks in the shadows. You want to see nice, crisp whites. And you want to see every shade in between. So that's kind of what our goal is there. Is see a good range of black and white. Blacks, middle grays, whites. Okay? So give the adjustment layers a try. And make sure that you understand how to use these selection tools. Okay? Everybody understand? Okay, that's what we're up to then.